Hi, my name's Adam, and in this video we're going to take a look at bees, why they're important to us, and some easy things we can do to help them. In recent years, there have been a lot of headlines about shrinking bee populations and colony collapse disorder, so a group of us from the University of Southern Maine went to Overland Apiaries, where these honeybees live, to talk to Erin Forbes about why bees matter. So Erin, why are bees so important?
Bees are what's called a keystone species, meaning that their impact dramatically, their thriving or lack of thriving dramatically impacts the other species in their ecosystem. And the reason is the pollination piece. And so, a lot of what you'll hear on the internet is, that honeybees are, directly or indirectly responsible for 1/3 of the food we eat, which is true. But that's not my honeybees. Like Erin Forbes' honeybees don't influence any of the food that you eat probably, because the bees that do that 1/3 impact are the commercial bee populations that are moving around creating our food or creating seeds for crop production that turns into food. What my bees here do is they pollinate within 3 miles of 188 Capissic Street. And so basically what they do is they produce some food in gardens for people who live right here, or some fruits in fruit trees that people pick. The thing that, my bees do is they produce food for birds. They basically produce food for wildlife. You know what I mean? They produce food for all the other people in the ecosystem. And without the honeybees, there would be no apples that the deer eat. To me, the really scary thing is that as wild bee population declines, basically everybody else's food declines. And then there will be these unequal balances between, the predators who will switch food sources, and then there's some birds and different other people who can't switch food sources. They can only eat certain things or certain times of year, and those ones are going to be the first ones that you lose. So it's a tricky balance. But
Okay, so bees transfer pollen, creating about 1/3 of the food we eat, as well as providing food for wildlife. But in the process, they also collect nectar that they use to make the honey that they live off of. So what kind of things can we plant around our homes to help provide nectar for bees?
Honeybees are monofloral, which is why they are excellent pollinators. And what that means is you can look at it 2 ways. You can say that they are very faithful to a flower. You can also say they're obsessive compulsive. And so basically the truth is they're obsessive compulsive, and once they get something in their head, it does not leave until whatever it is gone. And so when they start collecting from white clover, they'll continue going from white clover to white clover to white clover to white clover, which means that each successive plant is getting the pollen only from its own species, which is why they're such great pollinators. Because if you take dandelion pollen to an apple flower, you're not going to get an apple. You get nothing. You take apple pollen to another apple flower, and that's what does the sexual reproduction, you know what I'm saying? And so that's why they're so great at it. And so the things that the bees are really super interested in is much more like wildflowers. They like huge masses of the same thing, because they're not going to just give up on the clover for a minute and try out this pink thing here if everybody's lawn is blooming clover. And clover is one of the things that you can buy pretty certainly without seed treatment. And it grows beautifully in lawns and fixes nitrogen and improves the soil and blah, 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 blah. But of course people buy weed and seed for their garden and kill clover because they don't want to have weeds. And that's really the biggest change. The other big, huge obsessive thing that I have that is like my big love in the world is dandelions, because they are the first early source of nectar and pollen for honeybees and almost all other pollinators. So, planting things, flowers that grow into lawns. The wonderful thing about white Dutch clover in lawns is that people who mow are deadheading. So you're continually creating it to bloom over and over again instead of letting it go into seed. And I actually do rotational mowing in our yard here, intentionally to leave this section blooming clover, and I'm going to mow this one down so that that will bloom again next week. That kind of stuff is important. Flowering trees are critical, because they produce a mass of flowers as they grow, and so they're much more efficient than a space. So if you don't have, a huge tree eventually becomes about an acre of flowers. One of the earliest really cool pollen sources that we have here in Maine is scilla, which is a bulb that you plant you plant at this time of year, and it makes tiny little blue flowers. They kind of look like snowdrops. I don't know if you know what those are. And they grow in the lawn and they naturalize like daffodils. And so they spread out into lawns. And, again, it's one of these things that you plant 20 of them, and next year there'll be 40 of them, the next year there'll be 60 of them, and it takes 15 years until there's like 2,000 of them. But when there is, it's amazing. And then you just mow it like the rest of the lawn, and it's there.
Great! There are a lot of beautiful flowers and trees we can plant to help support bees. So finally, when a hive is strong and healthy, a portion of the bees in the colony will leave their hive in a swarm to find a new home. What should people do if they find a swarm like this in their backyard?
We actually have what we call the swarm hotline. And so if you just type bee swarm Maine, the first thing you're going to end up is on the Maine State Beekeepers Association website on this thing that says, do you think you have a swarm of bees? And if you do, you can fill out this internet form, or you can call a phone number that's a Google phone number. And that Google phone number sends an email out to about 40 people around the state, including Maine, who we basically have kind of territories, and somebody will respond.
And why is it so important to call a beekeeper and not just ignore the swarm and let them go on their way?
About 5% of swarms, of wild swarms that aren't hived by beekeepers, survive, and which is not big enough, for bee populations to continue living and have that kind of survival rate. And that's for a lot of reasons, because the swarms have all the same health pressures that all of the managed colonies have, and none of the help. Like they have none of the food, none of the beekeeper making sure that the things doesn't tip over, all that kind of stuff. So it's very important to create housing for swarms, and basically to get them to beekeepers who are going to take care of them, because otherwise their chance of survival on their own is pretty low.
Well, there you have it. Why bees are important and some easy things you can do to help. The threats facing bee populations are varied and complex, and unfortunately it's more than we could go into with this video. But I encourage you to click the links below to learn more. It would also help us out if you could take just a moment to give some feedback in this very short survey. Thanks a lot.